Morning, all.
Hello.
Good morning.
Morning, afternoon.
Waiting for Stefano or Ashley. There's Stefano. Now we have a host. Welcome, Stefano.
Good morning, everyone.
He was out celebrating his thesis yesterday.
Yes, it's going to. They asked me if I wanted to get my PhD, and I told them maybe after COVID is a distant memory and my home doesn't double as 3 offices, I'll think about that. Thank you.
A nice compliment, though. It's a very nice compliment.
I did. I took the compliment after I shuddered a little bit.
Well, I still see the participants list jumping around, so we'll still wait another minute or two, although I suspect we you all. Yeah, still jumping around, but that's okay. Let's get through some of the WIC stuff here. Welcome all to the TAC meeting. In case I didn't check if there was anybody new here, but just in case, this is our culture, right? We are focused on open source projects. Every member is welcome. Every project meeting secretary is welcome. We're an open, transparent, collaborative community. Even if you're not a member, we welcome your input, and we want this to be a great experience for everyone. If you have not already read it, this meeting is covered by the Linux Foundation's antitrust policy. If you're not familiar with it, linuxfoundation.org/antitrust-policy. This is our current agenda for today. It's what I sent out in the draft, and I did not get any requests for changes. The only answer that I got was Dan saying that the DCI follow-up will be next meeting, not this meeting, so that's why it's not on here. It will be on next time. But other than that, are there any additions or changes requests for the agenda? If I hear none, then we will proceed in this order. That means we may have plenty of time to talk about the webinar question document, or the FAQ creation. So let's go through our roll call here. I believe I see Giuseppe and Zongmin and Thomas. Is there any, and Eric is here. Anybody from Google on yet? So no Google yet. Huawei. I do not see Howard. I see Dan. I see myself. And I know Mike is out. Is Dimitrios on? Or is anybody else serving as backup for Red Hat /IBM?
Jeff Bork is on.
That's okay. So Jeff, are you going to count as the voting member for purposes of like minutes and stuff, or
Yeah,
we'll have quorum either way? Yeah, we'll have quorum either way, so it's up to you.
Thanks.
Okay. All right, so let's go to the first item on the agenda here, and perhaps the only one that will require a vote. We'll see. So I saw, Stefano, you amended the minutes this morning. Thank you. With the feedback that was received so far. And so is there any of the approval of the minutes is by the voting members. So out of those voting members, people on the previous slide. Oh, that's right. It is time for me to look and see whether there's anybody new to introduce. I'm scanning down the list. I think I recognize every name on the list. Is there anybody that is here for the first time? I don't think so. Okay. So I think all of you have introduced yourself before, at least once. Okay, great. All right, so now we'll go on to the minutes. Out of the voting members, is there anybody who needs more time, or shall we go ahead and vote on the minutes now? Anybody requesting a delay? No? Then I will ask, is there any of the voting members that have more amendments to the minutes, or need to vote abstain on the minutes, perhaps because you weren't there and haven't reviewed them? If I hear silence. Okay, I think all of you are here, and I know, Jeff, you were here last meeting, so you should be eligible to vote on this one. So then we will consider these approved. Thank you. Fortunately, our action item list is shrinking rather than growing. This is a good thing. So we are now down to only 3 action items, plus just the one that says everybody should be reviewing the things that are on the agenda, like the FAC text discussion. So let's just go through these. So Stefano, any updates on the first one?
No, but you can keep that on there.
Okay. Stephen, you want to report on the state of the second one? I know what it is, but I'll let you report since you're on the call.
Still working on that for you.
I thought that in the governing board meeting, the governing board decided to defer this until the time of the next charter review.
That is the broader answer. Yes.
So we won't nag the governing board about it until the fall.
That would be the way to do it. If you'd like to, park this for a distance, that's fine.
Okay.
Just so it's not in the active action item list.
But it was a discussion topic on the board's agenda last week or whatever, and it was changes. Any changes were deferred until the next time that the charter gets revved, which is approximately once a year. So somebody can change that, but that was the current state, just reporting on the board meeting discussion last week. All right, and then is Ashley on, or Stefano? If not, do you want to talk about the third bullet?
I'm here. It's been posted in. Hi, everyone. It's been posted in both GitHub and groups.io.
Excellent. And so we will mark that one as done. Thank you, Ashley. All right, if there's nothing else on the action items, we will continue moving right along. All right, any updates for the TAC from the outreach committee? Anybody who was in the outreach meeting yesterday can welcome to report on this. I wasn't there.
Fortunately, I was not in the outreach meeting yesterday, so
I'm looking at the list.
Yeah, I was there thinking about highlights, the work happening to prepare for this this event coming up June 4th, right? The Unplugged event. And there's going to be announcements hitting the channels or the media streams soon. So keep an eye out for that. We're hoping to get some good traction there. And of course, we have a talk coming up next week. The Veracruz project will be presented April 29th, 8 a.m. PST. Hoping to see everybody there. That's the 2 main topics as well. Oh, I guess there was another one too. We are looking at the website and considering updates to make information more readily available for everything that we do here. So on a whim, those are the key things I remember from the session yesterday. Hope that helps.
No, that's great. Thank you. Any other comments from anybody else who was there? But that sounds like a good summary to me.
That's a great
We
summary.
We did review a proposed logo for the event. So as I think that was Mark speaking, things are progressing pretty well. The logo is pretty cute.
Yeah, do you have an update to share?
I don't, but Ashley might, and we're going to look at it later today, I think.
Okay,
We
cool.
don't have an update from the initial draft that was shown yesterday, but we hope to have one early next week.
And this is an event logo, not something specific to the CCC, right? It's for the whole unconference, or is it just for, what's the logo for, I guess is my question.
It is for the unconference, so it'll act as the mascot / logo.
Okay, so it's not specific to CCC then, okay. Okay. If there's nothing else, any other questions for outreach? Okay, we'll keep moving. All right, so this is the slide that I had up during the board meeting last week. And this shows all the projects that have been submitted to the TAC and the various states. And so the yellow cells are basically the changes since last board meeting, which is approximately monthly, right? And so you notice down on the very bottom is the recent CCC attestation project. And so Stefano, you'll have to tell me whether there's anything that's newer since this. So for example, from the bottom up, the CCC attestation project has been board approved. You can see the date that's there. One thing that we need to do, and the reason this is on the agenda is on the far right column, you'll see mentor. I guess I should have gotten this URL up on the screen before. So let me just go to it now since we have time. So github.com/confidentialcomputing/governance. And then in here, there is project mentors right here. Okay, so the rightmost column covers the assigned mentor. We assign mentors once the board approves things. We could have mentors before the board approves things, whose job might be to help them figure out the process or presentations or whatever. But we're responsible for having a mentor after the board approves stuff. So right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that are supposed to have mentors, of which we've assigned 2. Thomas was the parentheses volunteer prior to Vera Cruz being adopted. So we need to ratify that, making sure, Thomas, are you still willing to be a mentor to Vera Cruz? Or do we need to look at changing it?
Hi, Dave. So we discussed this internally, and we have an update here. So Grant likely is going to be the mentor, and Mike Purcell will be co-mentoring. So
for Vera Cruz?
Yes, for Vera Cruz.
Okay.
Mike and Grant.
So this is a TAC decision, and so the proposal is Grant likely, and together with Mike Purcell. Okay.
Correct.
So since the project doesn't do the mentors, the TAC assigns mentors to the project. This is technically the body of people on this call here, your opinion. But we need to have volunteers, and so I don't know if we need a formal vote, because if there's no other volunteers, it's kind of, you don't have a choice, right? But does everybody agree that Grant Likely and Mike Purcell should be the TAC appointees as the mentor to Vera Cruz? Any objections? Great, we love volunteers. Okay, if only we can get volunteers for other things, but let me braille up on the screen for anybody else here what the job of the mentor is, just to remind us. Okay, our charter document about how we progress projects is what explains that each project is assigned a TAC representatives that will serve as a sponsor to champion the project and provide mentorship as needed. Okay. There's at least 3 things so far that the mentor is responsible for doing. Number 1, if it is going to get into the incubation stage, okay, which most of these are sandbox stage right now, or incubation is the next one, okay, then one of the requirements for getting to the incubation stage is having a written growth plan. And there's a separate link, I guess that should be hot linked now. to assist the project in creating one of those based on what the TAC expects. Okay. And yeah, there's a separate documented growth plan that this should be changed to be a link to. Number 2, to help the project, what material needs to be reviewed as part of the annual review process, right? So you can see annual review, right, which is which we started doing about a year after acceptance. And so these two have gone through annual review already. These ones have not, but would not necessarily go through an annual review until like a year from the board approval date, or at least a year from the TAC approval date is probably more appropriate. So you can see July and August of this year is when we might expect some more annual reviews from these people. So for example, Thomas Vera Cruz might be targeting an annual review sometime in the September 2021 neighborhood.
Okay.
Okay, and so that would be the mentor is responsible for helping them prep for that, because people say, well, what does the TAC want to know? And so that's the mentor's jobs, who should have been sitting in on the other reviews to say, well, here's what this project did, here's what that project did, so on. So that one is not linked. And then finally, when something changes that affects the submission template, like the things that we reviewed that we want to know if there's any major changes, which might be none, right? But if they were to make any license changes or add a code of conduct or change the code of conduct or security reporting processes or anything else that's a question on the submission template, then just proactively inform the TAC. And of course, if that gets missed, then the annual review process is just a check on that. So we'll see it then anyway. So this is, if something changes, then it's helpful to notify the TAC ahead of time. So those are the 3 things that we have so far that a mentor does. So this is only when it is ready to move to, or is making a proposal to move to incubation. This one is annually, and this one is whenever something changes. You can see it's pretty lightweight, right? And of course, if they have any questions, then it should be any other mentorship. But as far as what the TAC expects of the mentor, these are the 3 things that somebody might be signing up for. Okay. So notice we have these 3 other blanks here. Okay. Now, of course, Oclam has not been voted on by the board yet. Not unless Stefano, you tell me it has. I think it's still in the process, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And just a quick update there. The reason that is taking as long as it is because they do require a sort of wet signature, so a physical signature. And so that has to be curried. And so someone has to actually physically deliver that. I'm assured that that's been taken care of and is in progress.
Yeah, and I know Zongmin is on the call, who is one of the proposers of this one. But I think this is the one that needed to be signed in both a Chinese copy and a English copy.
Correct.
And I'm sorry, I don't remember whether it's Mandarin or Cantonese. So
I think in written, it doesn't matter. They're both written the same.
oh, are they the same? Huh,
Yeah.
okay. See, I learned
Fun
something.
fact.
That's great.
Pronounced different, but
Yeah. Okay, so there's a couple things on here. So okay, anything else? So we talked about Vera Cruz. Before I get in, yeah, I think we're done with the Vera Cruz column. Okay, or the Vera Cruz row, I mean. So let's see if we can do the CCC attestation column here. Right, now that this has been approved, we're responsible for having a mentor to the project from the TAC. Technically speaking, the TAC representative does not need to be a member of the TAC, although so far they tend to be. But like here, we just talked about Grant Likely, who's a former member of the TAC, but is not a current member of the TAC, and that is fine. So we're not obligated. It's just these are people that should be familiar with watching the other annual review processes and things. And so for a CCC attestation, do we have any volunteers or nominees to be the mentor for the CCC attestation project?
So I'm planning on keeping close track of that, so I wouldn't mind mentoring that as well. This is Dan.
Okay. So I'm going to start filling in volunteers here. Any other volunteers?
I plan to also stay pretty closely involved in there.
Okay. Mike is not on the call, and he's one of the chairs as well. So this is one I'm not terribly worried about, given that between the chairs of it there, but I do want there to be somebody who's listed on our web pages and stuff, like here, for example, the current mentors, at least one person. So pausing for a second in case I have any other comments here. Otherwise, we can say, do we want it to be, say, Dan and Ava, just like we have Grant and Mike here as like a primary and backup, or whatever you want? All right, so the proposal on the table, given that Mike isn't here, is to say the mentors shall be Dan and Ava. Any objections? Hearing none? Great. Thank you for volunteering.
I have a question.
Yes.
What board approval mean? What does it
What
signify?
up here? Yeah.
Yeah, what
Okay.
does it signify?
What does it signify? Is that what you asked?
Yep.
Okay. So in our project process here, if I look into here, it explains that there's like 3 steps in a project being accepted by the consortium. Project proposal process, project acceptance process, right? There's 3 steps. There's technical review, there's legal submission, and there's governing board vote, okay? So one column is the TAC has a vote that passes technical review, and then LF Projects LLC reviews and accepts the LLC document for the project. And then once both of those are done, then the governing board has a vote to make it be an official CCC project. So it's an official project when the board does a vote. Okay. Sometimes votes are done over meetings and sometimes it's done over email. More recently, they're just done over email. And so this, it says when that email vote or meeting vote happened at the board level.
Thanks.
Okay, and so basically this one is initiated once both of these columns, technical charter and IP assigned, both turn yes. And most typically we want a board presentation by then too. So although it's technically only gated by these 2 columns, in general, the board vote happens. We want all 3 of these columns to be yes before this one happens. So Keystone has not yet had a board presentation, but it did go through the 2 and the board did already do the vote on it. So that would happen a little bit out of order because it's not a blocker on this, but the board decided they did not need to wait to the board presentation. They were going to vote anyway, so that was fine. Okay, so let's move on up to Oclum. So Oclum is the next one that we expect to be board approved very soon now. And so here, if we have a name, it would be a parentheses name that would become active at the point the board vote passes. And so is there anyone here that would like to volunteer to be a mentor to the Oclum project once the, now or when the board vote completes?
Yeah, this is on me.
Yes.
I can be a volunteer.
I was hoping you would. Thank you. Pausing in case there's anybody else that would like to help. Only one is sufficient. By the way, in our history, the document that talks about mentors in here, when it was first given to us as a template from the Linux Foundation, it originally said 2 mentors. And back at the, I think it was the October 2019 meeting where we first adopted the policy to begin with and did some edits on it and so on, we had this conversation of, why would we need 2? And so we reduced it to a minimum of 1. And so it was some other organizations might use 2, and we decided we did not have a need to have more than 1 assigned. And so it's at least 1 right now. And so that's just some history here that more than 1 is fine, but we need at least 1. So, all right. Hearing no other volunteers, is there any objections to saying that if the board approves this, or once the board approves this, then Zongmin shall be the mentor? I'm putting this in parentheses because it's not an approved project yet, and we'll remove the parentheses as soon as the board vote passes. All right, thank you, Zongmin. We love volunteers. All right, moving up to the next one. Keystone passed their board vote last month as well. And so one of the next steps here, I took an action item on, or at least one of us needs to take an action item on since I haven't done it yet, is we need to reach out to the Keystone community and invite them to do a board presentation at the next board meeting that they're available for. And so let me just verify. Stefano, have you reached out to them? I think I had the action item, but have you done it just to make sure?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Between you and I think the action item was for either you or me, and we haven't decided which one of us is doing it. Would you like to do it, or would you like me to do it?
I actually have. I'm in conversation with them regarding the webinar, so why don't I just add that?
That's what I'm wondering. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
And just so you know, as I expected, Keystone is headed up by many students at Berkeley, and they would like to do a webinar in June, not May. which was kind of my guess. So Zongmin, if the Occlum folks are interested in having a webinar next month, that would fit into our schedule quite well. But again, we're flexible if that's not doable.
Occlum was already presented to the board, as I recall.
No, you're talking about the webinar series.
Yeah, talking about
It's
the
a
webinar.
webinar.
Thank you.
Yes,
Sorry,
we-
caught up. My apologies.
Mhm. Yeah, we can do at the end of next month.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be on the last Thursday. I'll connect you with Ashley via email, and then you can connect us with whoever will be doing the webinar.
Okay.
So
Sure.
that would be May 27 then, right?
Right.
Mhm.
The other thing I wanted to bring up in terms of that webinar was the time. I'd like it to be friendly for our presenters, not at midnight. So we'll work with them to find an appropriate time. And yeah, that's all.
Okay, so Stefano, if you can add into the minute notes that you have the action item to invite Keystone to the next board meeting, or at least
Will
the
do.
next one they're available for in case they can't do next month. So,
Sure.
okay, given that it's not blocking the board approval vote since that's already happened. So it's just, as soon as they're available. So, all right. And since the board vote has already happened, we're responsible for having a mentor now. And so let me ask, especially if there's anybody who's on here who's not already signed up to be a mentor for something else, is there anybody that would like to volunteer for being a mentor for the Keystone project?
I'll put my hat in the ring for that, Dave.
Okay, that was Stephen.
It is.
Okay, anybody else like to volunteer? It's nice to not have to make anybody do double duty and kind of spread these out. And so, as you saw, being a mentor is very lightweight. So don't be shy of being a mentor for something. So, all right, then if there's no other volunteers, any objections to accepting Stephen as the volunteer to be the mentor to Keystone? All right, hearing no objections, you're in. Right, if there's no other write-ins, then yeah. Thank you for volunteering. Okay. The other ones up here do not need a mentor yet because they're still very early in the process. But just in case anybody would like to volunteer for graphene, you are welcome to, and we can put your name in parentheses. But we're not obligated to have a volunteer yet. So, but if somebody is gung ho about graphene, then you're welcome to step up and be a go-between. Okay, no volunteers is okay at this point in the process, but I do want to give the opportunity if somebody wants to be associated with graphene or a helper with graphene. You don't have to be associated with the project in any way. So, okay, thank you all. We've accomplished our requirement by charter to assign mentors for the bottom four here. So, and have an action item there. So, doing good. Okay, so let's move on to our, I guess now, main technical topic. Well, technical discussions here, which is getting back to our webinar questions. And so I don't know if this has had many updates since the 8th. Let me quick scan down and see if I see any dates after the 8th. I do not see any dates after the 8th. They're all before. Okay, so that means it's the same as we left at last meeting. So my goal is to try to finish some subset of these such that we can start putting them on the FAQ. And I know, Mark, you mentioned that Outreach was doing some website updates, and the intent of these FAQ answers is for these to go. Anything we do get agreement on, right? Because some of these we have agreement that they do not belong on the FAQ, right? But anything that is on there, the FAQ page, for anybody who hasn't seen it recently, is here. So it's under Learn, and here's the FAQ right now. And you can see things that are a little bit maybe out of date, like this one here. How does it work with similar efforts, where we have some more specific questions that came out of the webinar, like how does it relate to, fill in the blank specific organization? And things like this one, what projects are currently part of this? we, the TAC, are in charge of the projects, and so we will need to update that one, for example, and that should match what was on that slide that I just had up. You can see things like what's a TEE, okay, and so this is one that's out of date with respect to our white paper, where we have a definition that's in the white paper, okay. But mostly the questions that are in the webinar are questions that are not in this FAQ that we would like to potentially add to this FAQ. I think in the past, if my memory is right, we've talked about as more questions here happen here, then I think in the TAC we've had a suggestion that these be grouped into questions that are technical questions versus non-technical questions. So there might be a TAC related section of the FAQ, things like what's a TEE versus, what is the confidential computing consortium, or how is it governed, or non-technical questions. So maybe we reshuffle these around. So those are questions that are topics we might have to work between, say, the outreach and the TAC, because some of these questions, outreach might be in charge of the wordings of. But some of these the TAC would be authoritative with, like what's a TEE, for example. Okay, so these are questions for which the TAC might be the authoritative body. Oh, where'd we go here? Right here. Okay. All right. So that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to get a couple of these made, one at a time, and get TAC approval to say, okay, we now have this text that's good enough to move over to the FAQ. We don't have to do this all at the same time. We can do it on a question by question basis. And so my hope is that there's some subset of these we can be done with today on the call, and say next action item is to put that onto the FAQ section for whoever's doing that editing, whether it is Stefano or Outreach or Ashley or whoever gets that assignment. So we don't do the assignment, we just do the text. Okay. If there's not any other meta questions about the process here, then let's start going through the text here. I want to finish this one if possible, since we spent most of our time last time on this. So I'm just going to put this up on the screen here to say, with the changes here, if I accept the changes, are we done? Where we talked about last time is the part that was highlighted here, and the part that's in red up here is the part that we were editing. And do we think that those texts that we're seeing here that we are happy enough with, or would people like additional changes or discussions now? So please comment. I might start accepting the changes from before now that you've seen the stuff on screen. So. It's quiet. Somebody verify you can still hear me. Haha. Stefano?
Yes, I can still hear you.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm just accepting these. I mean, I'm happy to reject them if people have other. Okay, so this is the current proposal on the table now. Please wordsmith, or this is if I don't hear anything, then I'm going to ask if we are ready to collectively approve this text. So just leave it up here while everybody reads it once again. So take a chance, read through this. I'll give people about 60 seconds or something to finish reading this and thinking about it. Okay. Seeing no edit so far, let me ask, does anybody have any comments now that I gave you a minute to read through it again? I don't remember who Anonymous Kraken is. Is that Dan?
I'm not anonymous anything right now.
Okay.
That's me.
Which was Eric. Okay, great.
Okay. I think that slash is doing a lot of lifting.
Okay. Do you have any suggestions? I think the intent was that, or that. Do you like that any better?
what I'm trying to figure out what it means. What is entity managing data and code?
Okay.
Because you say the TE hardware manufacturer, so really it's the TE hardware manufacturer and the entities that develop the code that runs inside the TE.
Yeah.
Within the boundary of the TE, right?
So not those that develop it per se, but those who authorize it, sign it, and are responsible for making sure that that's the code that's running in it. I think the original wording of that phrase came from Mike, and he's not on the call, so I think that's what he said last month or last meeting. Now, feel free to wordsmith, right? But it's whoever is that was. It was originally something like the admin, right? So he said, "What does the admin mean? An admin of what?" So this was Mike's attempt to expand and say what he thinks it really meant. So,
and the complexity of that statement is there are probably many entities involved, from the admin to whoever has access to the hypervisor to, the author of the attestation service that controls where the keys are released. All of those entities, whether individuals or companies or other tools acting on behalf of individuals and companies, are, in a sense, managing the data and code.
Yeah, although remember the question here is what's the minimum possible? So some solutions you can choose to trust more, right? That's that second sentence, but what's the minimum possible thing, right? So the minimum possible thing is anybody who has the hypervisor, not trusted, out of the TCP, because you can have solutions that do that. Key release, you can have a solution that doesn't actually release keys. The Adobe has stuff that never uses keys. You could have a solution that doesn't do that. You can have a particular workload that doesn't. So what's the minimum set across everything? So
with some types of CPUs, or rather some types of TEEs, you may not be able to have a hypervisor out of that loop.
I understand, but the question is, what's the minimum number?
Okay.
Right, because we're saying that, remember our definition of a TEE, well, actually here, TE hardware manufacturer, right? Remember in our definition of confidential computing, it's hardware-based TE. And so here's the TE hardware. So if you're talking about a software TE, granted, right? But this is a statement about TE hardware.
Well, that's just whether the TE is all hardware, right?
Yeah.
The definition is actually hardware-based. So
Correct.
TE doesn't have to be fully hardware.
Yeah, you're correct.
I still think there is something to this, the code that you place inside your TEE, right, doesn't necessarily come from a single manufacturer. If you've got the GC lib in there, for instance, right, you're trusting a lot of people, right? And you probably don't actually vet GC lib.
Well, that is the key point, which right now this is succinct enough that it doesn't go into that, other than in that third sentence, the for example point. The minimum set is if you vet it yourself, right? Now, often that's not practical, and you can choose to trust somebody else who vets it, right? Whether that is the actual author of the code or whether it's some other third party or the community at large, right? But the minimum set is if you vet it all yourself.
And I do like the emphasis on minimum here because it keeps an answer tractable. So in the minimum sense, you could write your own code. And so you are essentially trusting the code author or the signer of the code that you loaded into the enclave. And I don't know if, as I look at this in more detail, whether data necessarily needs to be mentioned there because it's already part of the question. So the person who's owning the data was kind of trusting themselves implicitly.
So you're saying you're saying in your opinion it reads fine if it just says managing the code?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Dave, quick clarification. So the code means the code that's going to run inside the TE, right?
Actually, this is correct.
It's like versus not the rest of the other like code, surrounding the TE.
Correct.
Okay, good. Thanks.
No, I added this. You had a great point that it wasn't obvious, and so running into TE is a great clarification. Thanks, Thomas. All right, Simon, are you happy enough now with it that you can grumble and say it's good enough?
Well, I'm going to jump in and say there's a distinction between code running in the TEE and code running in the TCB. And the question here is about trust. So it seems a little off that we're saying only code in the TEE needs to be trusted, but we're never mentioning the TCB and the fact that there is very often code outside the TEE, which might be in a different TEE or in some other way secured, that controls where things are accessible. It is still in the trust boundary, even if it's not in that same TEE as the managed code.
Well, no, hang on a second.
Okay.
Because it's covered by, you have to trust the TE manufacturer, right? So anything that's in the TCB is from the TE manufacturer.
No, not necessarily.
Yeah, let's take a case where you have, say, a main processor, and maybe you also have a TE, say, in a network card or something like that. And so, and you have a pairing between
so I'll
those.
go back to minimum.
Yeah.
Minimum.
There you go. Okay, now you're taking my approach. Go for it, Simon.
Well, it's just the TE manufacturer and the code that's in the TE. I think the for example needs to be in reality.
Yeah, I'm better with that. I think if the answer says in an ideal minimum case, comma, everything else in that first sentence stands. It's so disconnected from a lot of the scenarios that we see that I think just calling out, yes, this is possible, but in practice, it's more like this. I think that addresses all of my concerns.
So I put in practice here. I thought that was a great improvement.
Ava?
Any other? Go ahead.
Yeah, one other comment. Ava brought up a point about the data. You can get sources of data into a TE that can be used to corrupt what's in the TE. And I don't know if it's worth mentioning that you're still dependent on the data sources that are imported. And it does say data or workload the owner must protect for use in the question.
We also did some wordsmithing on the question last session. So this right here is actually a change as of last meeting. So
but the point is the TE is only as good as the source data.
Yeah. Eric, but it is up to your code to vet that data, because that data is just an input, right?
But it could be outside the boundaries of the TE where that data.
That's fine, but your TE that's fine, but your TE should vet its inputs.
Yeah.
So it's really
yes.
It's really
all right. Well, I'm good. The question says the data or workload owner to protect the data in use. So I agree that should happen.
Okay, so I'm going to pop back one level now. Great wordsmithing improvements here. Now that it stands, let me ask whether people can live with this text or whether there's any other objections that have, like something's broken that needs to be fixed. Is this good enough? Okay, then I guess, yeah, if you have further, because we can always amend it later, right? So if somebody does come up with something later, so I'll go ahead, Eric.
I still don't love the word managing, but I'm failing to come up with a succinct alternative.
Providing.
But that's not the only way to do it.
No, the topic last month was it could be somebody else's data that you are collecting. And so you're not the entity providing it, you're collecting it in that sense. And so you're managing. And so that's where the word managing came up with last time. It wasn't my term, it's somebody else made this point.
In a workflow where you're not trusting any particular signed enclave, but a specific binary identity, you don't need to trust the author of the code. You can trust an auditor.
Correct. Yeah, that's
which is why I don't like the word managing.
So here, I guess one connotation of managing is signing and verifying that that's the code that's actually running. And so like in an attestation sense, right, you might want to say, if that's not the code that's running because attestation doesn't show me it's running the right thing, then I will make sure it gets updated or choose to not trust the results or whatever it is. So even though I didn't author it, I get to decide which version is the one that's supposed to be running right now and whose code it is that's supposed to be running, right? It's the Eric Northrop signed code version 5 that's supposed to be running. So
Is the verb vetting then?
Yeah.
I like
Unless
that.
you got a better suggestion, I like it. So I guess I'm a little biased because I put in that word in that there. So okay. Any objections to approving this as stated to appear on the FAQ, given that we can always update it at any point that we want? Going once, going twice. Okay, feel free to keep adding comments or suggestions and stuff, but we can at least snapshot it to put it on the FAQ and then update it whenever we want. And so I am going to skip number 2. Actually, number 2, I'm still looking for somebody else to take the action item to actually write this. So let me give people an opportunity right now. In the discussion number 2, what we had decided was probably to delete the word mature. Let me make sure I'm in suggestion mode. Suggesting we were going to delete the word mature and have somebody create an answer that is based on text in, I think, the outreach white paper. We can also say, hey, outreach, would you like to do this for us? And then it comes off of the TAC agenda, which might be the easier way to do this.
I love that idea.
Great. Sounds like a second. Okay. Any objections to handing this one over to outreach saying, hey, outreach, would you like to craft something given the outreach white paper that answers this in the FAQ? Okay. Let's do that. Okay. The next one. So at the end of the call, in the last couple minutes, we started briefly just looking at 3 and 4 to prep people to look at them. And so originally 3 and 4 here were combined. When it was originally asked as a webinar question, TPMs and homomorphic encryption are part of the same question. And we split these because they're actually 2 different questions. So we have first one, can TPMs provide data integrity? If you're using a TPM, do you still need to use confidential computing? Proposed answer, TPMs can provide data integrity only for data which is recorded inside them and not for the data that is passed to a TPM for purposes of encryption, signing, or measuring. Ensuring such integrity requires the component passing such data to the TPM to also have integrity protection, such as being implemented in ROM. Okay, that's the current wording on the table here. Feel free to wordsmith or comment on.
I think it's probably worth.
Yeah, go ahead.
Probably worth explaining. So the TPM provides very rudimentary functions, right? Like, you know, very slow encryption, signing, and so on. So it's not a generic secure processing environment, right? And so I'm trying to sort of provide a contrast between this low end cheap TPM chip versus this sort of high end, take SGX or whatever type of processor. So it's kind of, so the answer needs to be in terms of processing capability, secure processing capabilities, of which of course TPM was not meant to be doing that.
I was trying to capture approximately the words, but you went
no,
past
good. You're doing great.
I'm trying to capture the words you said.
Hey,
so.
hey, if you ever want to, admin job,
Oh, I do lots of
secretarial role.
document. I do lots of document editing in the IETF. So
now, all of that said, there are projects out there that try to use TPMs with their somewhat limited capabilities to build a larger system on top of that can be trusted.
Yes.
Do we want to touch on that at all?
For the purpose, because the TPMs are used for multi-use confidential computing, right? And so the question here as phrased is limited to in the context of confidential computing. And so all I did so far in response to what you said, Ava, is I added being implemented in a ROM or a TEE, right? Because we've talked about before how your trusted computing base may include a hardware TE plus a TPM to get working together for some of these operations, and that would be fine too. Okay. Fine in terms of ensuring integrity. So.
Right.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. Any objections to approving this text to be a FAQ question? Going once, going twice. Okay, let's move on to the next one. And Stefano, hopefully you can help me keep track of whether we've approved these or how far we get and so on. So, all right, so the next one was similar question about homomorphic encryption. Can that provide data integrity? And if you're using homomorphic encryption, you still need to use confidential computing. So I will pause for a second here for 60 seconds to make sure everybody has a chance to read this.
So one of the things I didn't get around to doing is I was planning on taking a look at there was a couple papers in the last few years about functional encryption. And in other venues, I've heard other people explain that when homomorphic encryption comes up, people are often conflating it with functional encryption. And so providing that contrast in this block might be helpful. As it is, it's often hard to explain succinctly what homomorphic encryption is. So I think maybe providing some of those references could be helpful, but I didn't get those in yet.
I would answer also in the same vein of the scope of available operations, because if you take, homomorphic encryption, take the classic database model where all the rows are encrypted. The operations available are very limited, right? It's you basically any operation that you can break down into components of addition and multiplication, right? So
it's actually homomorphic encryption is I pulled from the homomorphicencryption.org workshops and stuff, but it's actually anything you can model as a circuit.
That's right. But if you say circuit, the reader won't know.
Yeah, but I'm saying it's not just addition, multiplication. It's not just mathematical operations. It's anything you can do as a circuit. So you can do ands and ors and things, but not loops, for example. You can't do loops as a circuit.
Right. Now, the other difficulty that people don't mention is you have to prep your data, and that goes into the cost, right? It's not like formatting and all that stuff, right? And so, but I'm trying to think. This is probably getting too detailed. It's not like the TPM. It's not a general purpose computation solution, right? So that's the sort of why the TEE wins out.
Okay, so yes, you're right. So we should have some similar phrase like this in this text here is your main point. Okay. Yep. I'm trying to find the appropriate way to edit or insert that. So let's get the beginning here for now. Okay. I'm having probably finding a great way to update this sentence here. Maybe start with the opposite. I got a typo. I don't know if this is the right way to say it if we want to do this, but I just want to capture it now while it's in my head. Can't be. Okay, now I want to take that and combine it with like certain types of computation on encrypted data. How about what can? Okay, so maybe something like that. I'll go fix up some typos. Okay, so maybe something like that. How does that look in the first sentence?
Yeah, I think that's going in a good direction, and I can.
I like where it's going. Oh, sorry.
No, I just. Yeah, go ahead.
But can perform. I think what's missing here in that sentence phrase is that it's a software technique, not a hardware technique. Right? Homomorphic encryption is not a general purpose computing environment, but a software technique which can perform limited types of computation on encrypted data, or a primitive types. It's like the basics of math. It's not advanced computation, though you can build more on top of that. Is there a way to express the?
Well, I said limited. I mean, I don't know that we the CCC wanted to do a tutorial on homomorphic encryption. So in some sense, I think saying less is better, although it might be fine to add a link. I think homomorphic encryption has a FAQ, homomorphicencryption.org. I wonder if there's a FAQ that we can link to about what is homomorphic encryption. That's what I'm looking for. Basics, yeah. So we could link to this page here, which is their description. Standardization, availability. So I guess this top thing here. Yeah, they don't actually give that type of detail on that. I know that they were also working on a FAQ, but I don't know that their FAQ is posted yet, just like ours aren't. But I know who the person is that's working on their FAQ. Yeah, I don't see the FAQ up yet that we could link to. Okay.
I think the main differentiation is it's a software technique.
Yeah.
Which I think you've now captured, but a software technique. Yep. Okay. Cool.
Okay. So if I accept these, just to make it easier to see. Okay. All right. Take a look at this. All I've done is I've accepted stuff.
If you want to be fair about the other techniques, I would mention like snarks or so, as opposed to attestation, because that's like a cryptography based technique to get computational integrity.
So you're talking about this phrase right here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what was the thing that you were saying?
Snark. How
do you spell it?
All caps and then the word snark. Yeah.
Okay, is there a link or something that can be hot linked? I'm not familiar with it.
I guess you can, there's, I don't know, there may be some canonical academic paper that we can refer to.
Yeah, because I wouldn't want to just put that in there because it's not understandable by somebody, at least not by me, without actually being hot linked to something. So
yeah.
And I don't even know what to search for because snark is probably a generic enough word, but not to be snarky or anything.
ZK snark, but yeah, it does feel like maybe that's. If you wanted a pure, if the question was like, did you want a pure cryptographic alternative to confidential computing, then you could stitch together a bunch of things like homomorphic techniques and
TPMs.
So I guess I'll my own opinion, not as a person editing and stuff, my own opinion is it's already prefixed with such as, right? And so it's not by way of limitation. So my own personal opinion is you only need to give one example. You don't need to give a complete list for things that here we're using a word that might be familiar to people in general, not specific to confidential computing or homomorphic encryption. This one is a more specific one. And given that this is just a such as, I don't know that we have to list other things. I don't object to it. I'm just saying that my personal opinion is I don't think it's needed.
Well, I mean, if we're only going to list one, I would list snarks and not attestation. I feel like the intent of the question is really about, can we do this without all these fancy TE techniques?
It is.
Can we do it, like, for example, with cryptography?
Yeah. So I'm happy to go along with whatever the consensus is. So just because I don't know the thing that you're talking about. So
I'll add that I'm also aware of work being done to use a TPM to provide the integrity protection at the software layer combined with homomorphic encryption to get at where this is going. So there is work trying to do that.
Yeah, but the TPM would be useful, would be used for attestation, right? You're doing measurements with like a TCG log or something, right? Yeah, that's the attestation category.
Could say such as non-interactive cryptographic proof techniques like ZK snarks.
I like that.
It's
ZK
lowercase
zero knowledge.
Lowercase ZK dash.
You think that's what it stands for? Whoops.
Oh yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, and then I guess the final S should be a lowercase.
Like that. Can I take it SNARK as an acronym?
It's a succinct, non-interactive argument of knowledge.
Nice.
The A is interactive.
No, the A is argument.
Okay. So something like that. And it should be the S still belongs there. It's not zero knowledge snark. It's zero knowledge snarks.
It's normally plural. Yeah.
Okay. I would still prefer that this be like a hot link or something, just because it's not expanded as an acronym. So we could also expand it as an acronym, but since I'm not familiar with it, I'll defer to you guys.
I can go clean this up afterwards with the FE versus FHE stuff too.
Let's see, who was that?
This is Dan.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so I think we've done Thomas's comment now. So action, Dan, add link. Okay.
Dave, before you move on, I'd like to move backwards to number 3. There's been a chat on the side, which I know you might not be able to see on the Zoom call.
Go ahead. I'm not.
Okay, so I raised some of my thoughts on number 3, and then we've had a follow-on with several folks agreeing with it, so I'll just read it out to the call. That TPMs may provide integrity protection, for example, when used for boot measurement or side channel verification of firmware integrity. And the current answer in number 3 seems to imply that TPMs do not provide integrity protection for components outside the TPM, but in fact, they very often do. They are measuring or they are storing measurements of, and thus providing integrity protection for a component outside the TPM. The component might be another piece of hardware and the firmware for it, or that component might be the bootloader, the operating system, or a piece of software.
Okay, so was that the end? Sorry.
That is the end. It's this middle sentence. The ensuring such integrity requires component passing data to the TPM also have integrity protection. That is what I object to.
Okay, so I didn't quite understand that because by the way, this topic was discussed by the TAC, for which some of you were there and some of you were not there when we first did the white paper section, where we have that little table of comparing it similar techniques, and we have a column for TPMs. And so under the TAC at that time did do a bunch of discussions on this topic that this text is trying to summarize what was in that discussion here. So happy to wordsmith, but the original point was the TPM is not active. It doesn't reach out and do things. It relies on another component to feed it data. Okay. So the point is, whatever component is feeding it those measurements that it's measuring has to be feeding it the correct values. The TPM does not ensure that.
Is there something that we could do to the question to make the context clearer, like some word like business data instead of just general data integrity? So I think the intent is, can I protect the data that I'm operating on with a TPM, or do I actually have to use this confidential computing thing?
Right. It's I've got a TPM. Is that sufficient to do everything I need to do? And the CCC's position so far is no. It is perhaps necessary, or something that does the job of a TPM is necessary, but not sufficient. So going back to your point, Ava, you said you object to the phrase that's there. Can you elaborate, maybe repeat whatever you said that was in chat or whatever? What's the issue there? And you have a wordsmithing suggestion.
Yep. Simon added that we expressly allowed for a TPM to be part of a TE definition in original discussions, and Thomas added that a TPM can be used to bootstrap into the secure state to hand off to a TEE. So my concern here, pardon the cat jumping on my computer. Okay, I'm trying to parse your, maybe look at this through the lens of what other device is passing data to a TPM. And some TPMs that I've seen do directly measure other hardware components, but if the intent here is to talk about the business data, so perhaps just clarifying that in the question or in the answer would remove all of my concerns.
So I am not a TCG person, but I have asked people that are TCG people, and they're the ones that told me that a TPM is not active. In other words, it doesn't reach out and do things. It needs something else to feed it stuff. So, but I don't claim to be the authority. I'm just passing on my understanding. So somebody can feel free to correct me if my understanding is wrong.
Depends on the TPM. And perhaps the acronym has changed since I was.
Yes, if you can point to anything that's in the TPM specifications from the TCG that talks about that, that would be helpful. Otherwise, it might be somebody's chip that goes beyond what's a TPM. It might do something beyond a classic TPM as far as spec conformance goes.
Yes, it may very well be something that now has an evolved acronym from when I was involved in that stuff 5 years ago.
I'm just passing on my knowledge of what I'm told is in the TPM specs. So, but I haven't read them.
I have. You're correct, David.
Okay. Thank you. So, and by the way, you'd read Simon, what you posted in chat, and I agree with Simon's point. I don't know whether it needs any text change here. Feel free to suggest one, but I agree with Simon's point that we expressly allowed that TPM can be part of a TE definition. Yeah, in either of two senses, right? You could have your TE is the combination of the TPM chip plus some other chip working together, would be one variation. Another example was you might actually have a TE such as, trust zone or whatever, that you have a trust application that's implementing the TPM spec in your TEE. And so then your TE becomes a TPM plus other stuff, not hardware based, but the functional based. Your TEE piece implements what's in the TPM spec because you put code in it that exposes the TPM spec certification. So, and there's probably other variations too, but yeah, yes to what Simon says, those are two examples. So. All right, so I'm still pausing in case somebody wants to suggest wordsmithing changes here, but I personally don't know of any wordsmithing changes that need to be made here, but if somebody else wants to suggest one, then happy to consider. But would want suggested text here that we could look at, so. If I don't hear or see anything, I'm gonna go on, but again, we can keep updating these at any point, right? These are not locked in stone, and some of the answers may even change over time. So, Ava, are you okay with me going on, or is there anything you wanted us to drive here? Not seeing anything from Ava.
Sorry about that. My second mic muted. If the folks who were all discussing with me in the Zoom chat on the side are happy with this, I will defer to the group and we can move on.
Unless somebody else speaks up, I'm going to move on. Okay, so last call for number 4, the homework encryption, the action item. Dan, you have an action item to add the link. And so I'm going to break my question into two pieces because there might be some future edition having to do with functional encryption, which I am not familiar with. But Dan, if you would like to propose something, then we can consider that, next time. But other than adding the link to Snarks, are people happy enough if we were to copy this part of it into the FAQ and then potentially amend it later? Or is there anybody that would want us to wait and hold for Dan to do additional changes beyond adding a link here before copying it over?
The only thing that I don't understand is software in front of software technique. Why is it a software technique instead of being just a mathematical technique, which can be implemented in software or hardware or a mix of both?
That's a good question. Could you have a homomorphic encryption thing that is pure hardware? You probably could.
Well, or a part that is software, and then you have accelerated bits as well.
Could you do homomorphic encryption in FPGA? Could you do it in, an ASIC?
Want to write a set of algorithms?
So yeah, I think that the point is that it's not. It doesn't require some specific hardware, so that it's a mathematical technique is fine. But I could just do general cleanup on this, and we can revisit the whole thing. Because it might be that the words like topology are also accurate, but hard to digest.
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying let's just not approve it this time and just wait until next meeting. You'll do some wordsmithing, and we'll review it next meeting for approval.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. And so let me just update my little comment down here. Add link and wordsmith for review next meeting. Okay. Great. Shall we move on? Okay. The next set of questions is about relationships with other orgs. Originally, it was phrased in a webinar as a question that was posted in text about a bunch of different organizations. What's the relationship between the CCC and fill in the blank with like 5 different things. And we split this into different questions that could be answered separately rather than trying to combine them into being readable when you're covering like 5 completely different types of orgs. So here's the text about what's the relationship between CCC and Trusted Computing Group. And so let me do accepts here and give people 60 seconds to read that. And I see, thank you, Thomas, for bringing this one in.
Sorry, Dave, was that a question for me? So I just stepped away.
No, I was just saying thank you for being the person that filled this one in. And so let's read through this and see if we have any wordsmiths to Thomas's proposal here. So that was not a question for you, it was a thank you.
Most welcome.
Okay, what do people think? Comments and wordsmithing? And we're looking at question 5 right now. If I hear silence, then I will actually call a question, but that would be surprising. I mean, this would be the first one that nobody's had comments on, so. I guess I don't have a suggestion here. I guess my only question is there anything more that we can or should say about what highly complement means? Can we be any more specific as anything, or is it better to say less here? I guess that is a question.
Do
for
we
you, Thomas.
want to draw any distinction between a standards group versus an open source group?
You can see the next one. Let's talk about number 6 first, in order because of your question there, because I did the text for this one, and I did talk about that, and I guess what you're making me think is, should we take some similar sentence and copy it back up into there too? All right, so you can see on the IETF one, the IETF publishes general purpose standard specifications but does not do code. Right? The CCE does not publish standard specifications but is a home for open source code. And blah, blah, blah. And so that's why the complementariness in the IETF is where the spec is versus where the code is. And I guess what you're asking is there any similar statement that you can make up here about TCG? Does TCG, Eric, or somebody else, does TCG, don't they have reference implementations for code?
They might have test harnesses.
Okay.
But it's primarily for the hardware.
Okay.
Like you know, and you know, there might be somebody contributing a TSS for the 1.2. You know, but it's by no means like compulsory.
Okay, gotcha. So you could make a sentence statement about them publishing standard specs but doesn't doing code for them.
Yeah, just cut and paste.
Okay. Okay, I don't know where in the order right now, so you guys tell me. I'm just gonna do the cut and paste, and then you can tell me where to put it. So
does not code, does not produce code. You know what I mean? Just you know, English. I mean, you know, well, strictly speaking, the IETF usually likes to have a couple of, you know this day, right? A couple of implementations. But you're right, it's not an open source consortium, open source software consortium. Just a matter of anticipating questions. Has anyone heard, you know, audiences asking, well, you know, should the world expect a standardized API set to, you know, interact with, you know, confidential computing platforms? And if the answer is yes, then you know, which entity would be dealing with, you know, standardizing those APIs?
I will give you a generic answer, not specific to the CCC, because this is a question that's often asked in like IETF, and I give the same answer, which is that it's a complex question, right? So I'm just elaborating on the complexities of the question. When you talk about APIs, there's actually, well, first let me draw a split. The term API is ambiguous. There's 2 top-level branches. One is in the REST API sense, where API means protocol that goes across a wire, typically across HTTP. So when some people say API, they mean REST API, which is a different category from everything else. Then there are language-specific APIs like, you know, JavaScript, C++, C, you know, etc., you know, Python, etc. Right? So those are language-specific things. So there's 2 different meanings of APIs. I'm guessing you mean the second one, right? But some people that ask the question actually mean the first one. Within the second one, there are things that you might consider to be core for the language, and there might be things that might not be. So if you think about a core library or an upper layer library that's like an add-on or something like that. So let's look at, you know, C++ and C both have standards organizations that are official for the libraries. So things like the POSIX standard, for example, covers a bunch of C APIs. And so it's the POSIX organization, or set, you know, the Austin community that standardizes POSIX APIs for, you know, networking and files and everything else. For C++, there's a standards organization that does that. For JavaScript, there's a standards organization that does that. And so for many of the languages, there's an organization. If you want them to be a standards API, you got to go to that particular organization if you want them to be a standard. You can always do an add-on or whatever, and now you're just using a library, right? So it kind of depends. as to where's the best place to do it. Well, if you wanted a C API, the answer might be, then you might want it to be a POSIX API, and you'd have to go to a particular location that does the POSIX standards. So that's why I say it's a complicated question with a complicated answer. So,
but there's also a possible interpretation, or maybe the straight misunderstanding for people who are not familiar, but because when they see the word platform, as in confidential computing platform, the next question is like, yeah, like, can I use a REST API to, talk to the platform?
In open source projects, you often don't do the standard APIs, you do APIs specific to your project, and that's perfectly fine. That's the library approach, that's the add-on approach, and that's normal. It's whether you want a standard API because the way you ask the question.
I will add that just wearing my general open source cloud platform developer hat, I have heard for years and continue to hear from people who use public clouds that they many companies, many consumers rely on being able to deploy or manage infrastructure across different environments. And so if we say, or if the question is, are people asking for a standard REST API to interact with platforms that provide confidential computing as a service? I would just say generally the trend has been for years, more than 10 at this point, that some people choose to use higher layer abstractions than the actual platforms themselves.
So
yeah,
I will
that
observe
was where
that
I was getting at.
We are on a different topic than what's being presented, which is fine.
Sorry,
We have the
sorry.
time or whatever. And so I'm happy to let this one go for a couple more minutes because it's an interesting topic and it might generate some other action items for us. So I don't want to cut this off. So
the IETF, and I think there is some relevance potentially. I don't know if we have to capture them in the answer here because the IETF specifications do often at least intersect with that layer of concerns. Even if they're not specifying an individual platform, they might describe a protocol by which users of broadly the internet talk to service providers or talk to services talk to services. But I'm pretty happy with the answer since it does mention that there are several different bodies, each of which have a role to play in describing how all of these things interact.
Okay, so then popping back to these questions here, I think the tone that we want to convey is that confidential computing is happy to work with other organizations and help figure out how to bring confidential computing to any scenarios that any other organizations have some piece of, right? It's a collaborative style tone that we want to take here. And so we want to talk about how things are complementary or how things can work together or how you can add CCC relevance into other existing things you might have. And so I think we want to make sure the tone keeps along those lines.
I think that the tone is very clear that the CCC is a code producing body, not a standards writing body.
Okay, and so we've added in this text about could be complementary. Like I mentioned, and I don't know that we need to mention in the text here, but one example is if you take a TPM specification and implement it in a trusted app on inside of a TE like TrustZone or SGX or whatever, then it's like a virtual TPM running in your TE, and so you're compliant to the specs. And so that's an example of you might have an open source code project that does that. And if it runs in a TE, then maybe CCC could be a home for that, and that would be an example. So that I'd just say it could be complementary if there are so. And that's an example of relevant to. I tried to pick a phrase that did not mean implementation of a TPM in. It might be some other piece relevant because we have some projects that are about deployment, some that are about implementation, some that are about sitting on top, whether it's blockchain or whatever else. And so there's many different ways of being relevant to.
The one line above where you've highlighted says open source code projects, which would preclude us ever accepting a hardware project. If someone wanted to propose an open designed hardware project for some component of the space, would we consider it or would we redirect them?
We have not ruled it out at this point.
Okay.
I think we've had, what if discussions when we're doing scope, what if somebody contributed a hardware design for a RISC-V architecture into us? Would we accept it? We have not actually answered that question, but we have not precluded it.
Okay, yeah, then maybe just removing the word code there, since that presents a limitation that we haven't agreed on.
Okay, and I would do the same thing down here too, where it's just where I copied it from. And just say open source projects, not open source code projects. Okay. Okay, so let me ask if the ordering and stuff is right. Is there any objections to going forward and going ahead and posting question number 5 onto the fact now? Or are there additional actions need to be taken? Okay, hearing no objections, we will count number 5 as approved. And if people want to keep doing suggestions, we can always update it. So let's go on to number 6 here, and I'm going to accept some changes down here to make it easier to read. Don't know what that one was. That was a comment, not something to accept. Okay, so okay, so down here it's just meeting notes, right? And so this is the text right now. Is there a way to? No, that's not okay. Okay, and so now you can see the meeting note discussions. So Thomas, you had a number of points last time, and I don't remember whether they're things that we already updated or whether things that need updates or don't need updates. So I'll let people read through this for 30 to 60 seconds here, and then I'll come to you, Thomas, in a minute.
Hey, Dave, I have maybe pedantic observation, but when you say standards, not everything the IETF publishes is actual standards, right? The IETF is in the business of creating technical specification, which includes standards. Well, maybe this is...
That might be true for the TCG as well.
Yeah.
So it's true that they publish general purpose standard specifications. You're saying they also publish other things too. Okay. Would you like a wording change? Like, do you want me to delete standards?
I would say general purpose technical specification, including standards.
And the same thing for TCG. Would we make the same change up here?
Possibly. Let me think. Yeah, they have recommendation as well, right? So.
I think the difference between a specification and a standard is pretty minimal. So I think we should just use specification only.
Okay, so let me revert this for a second here. So let's talk about the IETF. The IETF does do standards, but it also does informational documents such as problem statements. Now, the main purpose here is to say the IETF publishes an implementable specification, and the CCC can be the home for the implementation of that. Like, you don't do an implementation of a problem statement, you do an implementation of a solution statement, right? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of outside the scope of the point here. So that's why Jethro's point, I think I could go along with and just leave it as standards, but what do others think? So I'm trying to keep this sentence and this sentence, the TCG and IETF, in parallel as much as possible. So,
as I said, it was a pedantic observation. I think we can go with this as it is.
Okay. Any other changes necessary to this text? Okay, let me come back to you. Is Thomas Vasati on the call? Yeah, my participants. Thomas is on the call.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
So I was pointing to 7942, which is where we say that to have the standard validated, you need to produce an implementation. So, but this is outside the scope of the IETF. It's an input to the process, so it's okay. It's okay like it is.
Okay. I'm just going to mark yours as resolved. Okay.
Correct.
Not deleted, but okay. And then Thomas Harjono. is there anything in the March 25th meeting discussion that is still unaddressed that would actually need to affect the fact text?
No, I would nuke all that green
Okay.
text. Yep.
Gotcha.
Thanks.
That was just me capturing things so we didn't forget it. So,
Good, thanks.
okay. All right. So then the question is, are we ready to approve this text for posting on the fact, given that we can continue updating it? Any objections to popping this text into the fact? Okay. Let me go on to the next one, which we did not really start talking about last time at all. And so this one is about the relationship between the CCC and other open source homes. And again, I have no idea whether these need to be split into two questions or are okay to combine here, but it looks like Dan did the text here. And so what's the relationship between those? So just gonna accept capitalizations here. Okay. All right, there we go. So question number 7 is above the note there. Okay, let's review Dan's text here.
Yeah, for example, a project like Parsec, which is a CNCF project, and I see that we could use it in CCC, right? So CCC would be on the receiving side, not just of, on the producing side for OpenSSF and CNCF. So the relationship could be more symmetrical than just potential consumers.
Do you have any suggested text changes? I mean, I read through this. I kind of like Dan's text here, so. Any wording suggestions? Other than expanding the acronym, I didn't have any. That was my only comment. I like it.
I agree that it's likely mutual rather than consumer producer strictly.
Do you have a wording suggestion?
Thinking about it.
Could add a sentence at the end saying that these aren't strict rules, that there's examples of an opportunity for reciprocal usage.
I'm not sure what that means. I'm trying to capture your thing there, but please wordsmith to be more understandable than what I captured. So. I don't know. Reciprocal
There's
usage,
not
maybe
strict
elaboration.
Yeah, I think one of the aspects that I heard there was that there's not strict scope boundaries between these organizations.
So was the counterexample or the addition the fact that there may be cases where CCC wants to consume CNCF projects? Is that the main point?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right, I'm going to try to do my own suggestion here, but dissuade anybody else from doing the same. So,
I might remove the entire potential consumers on and say OpenSSF and CNCF and other open source foundations contain projects which.
Okay. I was just doing my own text here. Go ahead.
Just type in both places at the same time.
I can't, so I need 2 people to do that. So, okay, go ahead, Eva.
The OpenSSF and CNCF and similar open source foundations may contain projects which either use or are used by projects in the CCC. Right, and I'm thinking of, for example, Oclum and its relationship to Inclivare, wherever Inclivare might end up, if it is or were to be contributed to the foundation. As far as I'm aware, it has not been yet. That would be a very clear example, if they're not in the same foundation, of a mutual relationship where one is using the other while driving requirements or designs into it. I could see the same thing with respect to Parsec or Keylime, things like that.
I'm just doing some grammar and edits and stuff. And so if I understand right, Ava, you're proposing something like this as the replacement for this text, right? So you're suggesting something like that.
Yes.
Okay. Since
and a grammar niche that use or are used by.
Now that may.
It may contain projects that use or are instead of be. Replace the word be with. Yep. That use or are used by.
Contain projects that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I was thinking it applied to this may, but you're right. It's the or is inside the that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yes, I agree. Okay. So the old text here was Dan's. Dan, are you happy with the new proposal here?
I think so.
Okay. All right. Any other wordsmiths to the? Oh, okay. If you're happy with that, then I'm just going to accept this one. Okay. Do we need to expand OpenSSF like I expanded CNCF? And I don't remember. I don't remember what it is. It's something security.
It's
Open source security foundation.
Open source. Yeah. Okay.
So I don't know that they actually do produce software projects at this time. I'm going to double check that real quick.
Okay.
Yeah, they do.
Okay. They're perhaps less well known than CNCF. I wonder if we just swap the order so we start with a more well known one. Unless someone tells me OpenSSF is known more than. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm just going to swap the order here to.
Since you seem to know that they do, and I can't find it on their website, they list working groups and meetings. They certainly produce resources and guidance, but can you name one project in the OpenSSF?
Yeah, they've got about 4 different projects now. One is metrics dashboard that looks across the security attributes of different projects, and then there's the badging project.
Scorecard, badging. Okay, got it. Thank you. That's what you're thinking of.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
And I'm proposing an update to the question to make it reflect the answer, because in the answer we don't limit it to just those 2. And so I'm proposing an update to the question that also doesn't limit it to just those 2, between the CCCF and other open source organizations such as CNCF and OpenSSF. What do people think about that wording of the question? No objection?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it works for me.
Okay. Okay, so with that, popping back up now, all of number 7. Any objections to or any other further wordsmiths to approving number 7 for addition to the pack?
I think you need an and in between the CNCF and Open Source Security Foundation.
You're right. The and was moved into the wrong place when I did the reorder. Okay. Thank you. Good catch.
So outside of this FAQ answer, we might want to do some more discussion about why would a project come to the CCC versus some other place.
Yep.
Because first, yeah, maybe I won't start that conversation, but.
Well, let me ask, because we can approve this, and then do we think that a future amendment to this might actually want to answer that question in the actual fact, or is that something you think would be best kept out of the fact?
If we wanted this to be a little bit of a recruitment phase, then we'd want to think about it. I don't think it necessarily blocks putting up an answer before then.
Personal head on, I agree with both of your points. That I think I would love to have that be a recruiting point, and I agree it doesn't block. So that's just me personally. Would you like to take an action to propose a straw man answer to the why would I bring my project to CCC versus someplace else? Or when is appropriate to bring it to CCC versus someplace else? If you have thoughts on that. You don't have to do it now. I'm saying, are you willing to take an action to try to think about it and come back?
Against my better judgment, I will take another action.
Noted. We'll give you one get out of action item free for taking this one. Okay, I see note to outreach committee. It might be nice to have a list of partnering consuming organizations posted somewhere. Some open source projects maintain a list of other projects that use their code that's generally managed by their project submitting a PR, adding themselves to a list. Anything that we need to do about, I don't know whose text that was, whose comment that was, so. Anything we need to do about that? And this is it might be nice, and I don't know who this came from, so I have to go back to the history of the document. All right. And if we don't know, then we'll just leave this in here. It won't be in the fact. We'll just keep it in this doc. So the next one we've only started talking about, and Mike has put in 2. So this is what are the most challenging unsolved technical problems faced by confidential computing today? So the point around potentially putting an answer here in the fact, which may or may not be the right thing. We haven't decided whether to put it in the fact for sure, whether it belongs there or not. Okay, now we're getting into things that are webinar questions, and we haven't decided what the right way is to address them. But one of the goals that we have is communication with academia. So let's say that there are, grad students looking for something to do a PhD on, and gosh, if we can get more people to be doing PhDs or even master's projects on confidential computing topics, then great. Maybe they'll do work on open source and promote confidential computing, and we'll all be better off, and we'll have some great learnings out of whatever they do, and so on. So what is that we would, that if academia is looking for something to work on, this is our chance to give them ideas of stuff that we think would actually be practically useful if academia could contribute to certain things, whether it's academia or just the research community at large, right? So whether it's academia or not. So, and so this is other interesting research problems that we would love for people to look at. And you can see Mike has 2 ideas here, both of which sound good to me. So there's a couple of questions, which is the fact the right place to put this, or is there some better way to do that? And secondly, is there a longer list of topics or refinements on list of topics? And is this something we should do sooner, or is this something we can push until later? Are all kind of open questions that we haven't really gone through yet. And so let me just open it for general discussion here as to relationship for research problems.
So I think there are actually quite a long list of research challenges that we have. I think if you want the fact to be longer lived, you might just want to acknowledge that there will also always be research challenges. And for a list of latest ones, you could point to a document that is, within the GitHub. Right. And then, allow folks to, put a list of topics that they think. I've keynotes that I've given, I've actually talked about where I think the challenges are in driving confidential compute to significant scale, right? Yes, there are things around how you get certain features inside certain TEEs, but then the fact that you have TEEs starts to open up some very, very interesting things, like you start to expose the TCB of the hardware platforms that the cloud providers are using back to consumers of the cloud platform, and how do they really rationalize around that beyond the cloud provider saying all is good, right? How do you figure that out when you're in a very, very heterogeneous environment, right? How do you scale confidential compute to non-CPU execution silicon? How do you scale, what's the right software architecture to support that? The list goes on and on and on and on, right? How do you get to using confidential computing without actually knowing that you're using confidential computing? That's ultimately where I'd like to see us going, right?
So the main point that I heard you make, Simon, is that you are volunteering to help augment the list of topics. Did I get that right?
I can certainly write down the list. I can certainly write down the list of things that have occurred to me in the past. Yes.
Yeah. Because I think that sounds like a great list, and I like, personally, I like your suggestion of putting it into GitHub. I think there's a question, which is easier for somebody to update, the FAQ or the GitHub doc? Often, at least in the past, so far the answer is the document in GitHub, which is why I kind of agree with your suggestion. Whether the FAQ should be harder to update than that is kind of a different question that maybe outreach or people might want to weigh in on. But personally, I would think your proposal would be fine as far as what you do with the FAQ is point to something that's in GitHub. I don't know what others think, but I think that'd be fine.
Right.
I'm not going to comment here on technical ones, so I think those are all good points, and that we could go into each one of those, but I think they're all good points. So. Any other people have opinions on this question or how we go about answering this question? So, Simon, if you want to help augment these, which would you prefer as far as filling in the list of things that you just mentioned and so on? Would you prefer filling it into this Google Doc? Would you prefer creating a GitHub doc and doing it as a pull request? What would work best for you personally?
I can write a markdown document on items that I've written the list down before and I've presented it, so it's just a matter of putting into more words. I'm a little challenged for time at the moment.
But at least you're not synthesizing new things, right? You're putting down things that are either in your head or on your slides, right? So
yeah. These are sort of like, but
I mean, for the rest of the tech, it's probably easiest if you copy them into this document, even if what goes in here gets copied into a GitHub document later. But if it's less time for you to put it into a markdown, then do that. So do whatever is easier for you, and we'll figure out how to.
I can copy the list in here, and then we can move it to a markdown later on if you want to. But I can edit into this. That's fine.
Okay. So then let's put this back on our list of stuff to review once that's done. Is that something you think you might be able to copy in here before next meeting, or do you think it would take you longer than that based on your other?
No, I can. I'll find time. Okay. I'll find time to speak before next meeting.
All right. Excellent.
I'm presuming there's a thread I'll be able to find the link to this document on.
Yes, it is it is linked from the agenda that I sent out.
All right, okay, that's fine. That's fine then. Yeah.
Okay. And since Mike isn't here, it's probably not worth talking about this thing here. I kind of agree. I kind of accept his answer here, and so but this is one that, since this is Mike's text and Mike is not on the call and Simon's got an action item here, then let's just cover this one next meeting. If somebody else has any thoughts right now they want to bring up, that's fine, but otherwise we can just push this one to next meeting. Okay. Number 8 is one that we have tentative agreement, meaning I know Mike and I are in agreement, and I have not heard anybody else speak up with a different opinion. That's what I mean by tentative agreement. Is number 9, we are not put into the FAQ.
And by add-on, did they actually mean discrete? They're often referred to as discrete TPMs versus integrated or firmware TPMs.
This is literally how it was asked in the question text submitted during the webinar, was this exact wording here, but that was my understanding, is this means discrete, yeah. But we in the webinar, this one, we chose to not answer it because we thought it was kind of out of scope to be asking the CCC this question, right? This is more of a question for TCG, so.
Well, yeah, I think, yeah, and so the answer needs to be more of, TPM definition and ecosystem is outside the role of the CCC. Go and see the TCG for further details.
Exactly. The extent to which we should answer it is the extent that we covered up above about do you still need this confidential computing? It's the question about we covered above about TPMs, right? Number 3, right? This is the extent to which we want to answer it, is just our answer in number 3.
Yeah.
And then number 10, looks like, is this Mike's text here? Okay, because some of these are all the questions from the webinar, some of which go into a FAQ, some of which we might just ignore, some of which we might respond directly to the requester if we knew who they were. I don't know if we do. But when you talk about verifier, what will be the root of trust, and how do you make sure the chain isn't broken until to the user/customer? This might be a question, because it's about the verifier. This might be an attestation question. And if it's an attestation question, then the verifier need not be specific to confidential computing. So like a verifier, if you think about the presentation that I give about summarizing the IETF RATS architecture that many of us are involved in, the attester is confidential computing, and the same verifier can deal with the testers who are confidential computing attesters and non-confidential computing attesters in the same verifier. You can tell the difference, right? But this question here might not be specific to confidential computing, because if the verifier itself, depending on how it's phrased, what will be the root of trust? Now, we, the CCC, might say, hey, if you're going to have a verifier for confidential computing attesters, you might want your verifier to also be based inside a TEE. That would be a fine confidential computing style answer. I don't know what else the person was thinking or what Mike was commenting on here. I don't know if others have any opinion based on just what's limited information is here as to whether there's something that belongs in the FAQ or not. If others don't have a strong opinion, then for next meeting, I might take an action item from an IETF RATS perspective to start to maybe phrase a question, a possible answer along the lines of something specific to confidential computing. And I'm thinking along the lines of, okay, if I have a verifier, I would want some answer to say the rationale for why your verifier might want to run inside of a TEE. And I don't know if others have thoughts, but I might try to come up with something next time, and we can decide whether anything belongs in the FAQ or not, which I don't know yet. But I'm happy to take a shot at some wording here that will then enable people to decide whether we want to do anything in the FAQ. So.
Sure.
there's no comments, I'm gonna just go on. We've got about 5 minutes left here. I don't remember if there was anything else on our agenda. Let me just check here. No, any other business. So we'll go for another 2 minutes just in case there's any other action items we want to assign for next meeting. So the next one was about we had a table where we said homomorphic encryption was slower than CC in various metrics and things, and said, can we be precise? And Mike said that, and I said, so my belief, and I think Mike's belief, is that we should not try to put anything like this into the FAQ, right? And so that there is no action items necessary on this one, but let me know if anybody disagrees. So that our coverage of homomorphic encryption up in question 4 or whatever it was is the extent that we should go into that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the last one, is there any effort to do the attestation in open source? So I guess there are open source attestation projects. This is a great question for a CCC attestation project as far as code. So do we think that there's anything to do in the FAQ yet, or is this something that's better to wait until we have something out of CCC and then add something to the FAQ then? I guess I would ask one of the CCC attestation chairs to comment on their opinions here. We certainly advertise on the CCC webpage. Do we have it up there anymore? No. Confidentialcomputing.io. We have up here, we have projects. Okay. And right here is where the intent is to have all current projects. And you can see CCC attestation is absent, even though it is an approved project. See, Veracruz and even Keystone are on there. So we need to have some updates into here. But certainly CCC attestation should have one on here. Okay. Once we have one on here, do we need anything in the FAQ? Can we just expect people to look here, or what do people think? So certainly we need an action item to have this page be updated, Stefano.
There was a longer discussion, Stefano, that you missed, but we gave Ashley, and through Ashley, you plenty of action items yesterday in outreach to start a bigger discussion about updating the website and making that something that is more serviceable by the group. So
yeah, I saw all those action items come across and GitHub issues. Yeah, that's great. We'll work with Craig too. We'll pull in the Linux Foundation web folks, and we'll get moving on this.
So I think all the projects are on this
to your
page,
point,
except for CCC attestation. I think everything else is actually on here, between the top and the bottom.
Dave, I think you were asking a question back on the Google Doc.
On the FAQ, yeah. It's whether there's any impact on the FAQ or not. So.
I think the answer to that question is yes, a project has just been started and discussions are welcome, but that answer will age not so gracefully as work does happen.
Yeah, so that's why I was asking, should we not do anything with the FAQ now and only do something with the FAQ at such point as an answer is unlikely to age rapidly?
Or should we put in there sort of a call to action to say, yes, there are efforts underway, and here's where you can join them, and leave it at that? No mention of the status of those efforts.
Okay, so
just like if you'd like to get involved with our efforts.
Yeah. Ava, can I give you an action item for proposing an answer for us to review next time then?
Happily.
Okay, excellent. I'm just looking at the time. We got like 1 minute left, and so if you can take an action item to fill in a sentence or two or whatever about what you were just saying, then we can just come back to it next time. Okay, we're about out of time now, and so let me just go back. Any other business? Is there anything else that needs to be mentioned before we end the call? Any news? Okay, if not, then we got a bunch of action items, including one for me. So we will see you in 2 weeks. And as a reminder, I think we have the continuation of the DCI topic next time, and we'll talk more about these webinar things. They're probably the main two that we have so far for 2 weeks from now. All right, thank you all. We'll see you next time.
Cool. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks all.